Regular viewers of this show know that we have had and will have much to say about critical race theory. Discussions about it are cropping up more and more at school board meetings and other public forums as parents start to push back on the idea of teaching our kids that racism is a feature, not a bug, in our country's design. I'm doing my fair share of pushing back on that, as you will see in a moment. My friend here today, Robby Soave, has been watching this trend very closely. He's a senior editor over at Reason. And Robby, you are writing and working on what your definitive take is on critical race theory and the debate over banning it in public schools, because we are now at that point. Like, Republican legislatures are starting to clap back on this stuff and try to ice critical race theory. I am surprised at how much I'm seeing this everywhere. Like, it did go from being like a fringe subject to now it is on every channel, on every Twitter feed, and in every email Substack newsletter.
Right. Well, there has been a concerted effort by many conservatives, most notably Christopher Rufo, who is like the leading anti-critical race theory guy. He's a Manhattan Institute scholar, to define everything vaguely race-related that people don't like, that I don't like. I also don't like most of these things, as critical race theory. So there's a lot of layers to this, like one being that, so okay, literal critical race theory is just a legal theory. It's a part of like progressive education in law school that supposes that the structures of our society, our legal institutions, came about in this country where there is a legacy of slavery and segregation. So race-neutral stuff, color-blind stuff, can't actually be race-neutral, color-blind.
It's really simple. I mean, in libertarian politics, like, we've talked about systems as racist for the longest time. Like, I was brought into the libertarian movement on criminal justice reform, and if you step back, you go like, oh, okay, so like, critical race theory kind of informs like thinking about like the prison system and the drug war as a system as racist. Like, things can be racist. But there's sort of this new school of thought, like I keep saying, like anti-racism is not necessarily the same thing as critical race theory. It's like a cousin.
Well, no, and then there's a lot of bad stuff. There's bad stuff that people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi, who are anti-racist scholars who will deny they have anything to do with critical race theory when critical race theory is being talked about in a bad way, but then have admitted, Kendi told Slate like 2 weeks ago that critical race theory is foundational to his work. And the things that those people say, again, it's not really the things that are being taught. It's like they're diversity consultants. They do seminars. They do, you know, kind of diversity seminars for corporations, for school officials, and the stuff in those seminars is nuts. It's not actually what critical race theory adherents would describe as critical race theory, but at that point, then we're just arguing about the definitions of things.
Yeah, I mean,
what they're proposing is nuts, and I would not want my kids like indoctrinated into that thinking either.
Yeah, because a lot of parents around the country are going to their school boards and they're screaming about critical race theory. And what they are, I think in most cases, like what they are seeing and what they are scared of, and I think rightfully so, is these stories about like college professors at Yale and Harvard talking to their students about how like once they realized that whiteness was a thing, they wanted to kill white people and they fantasize about killing white people and they wake up seeing blood on their clothes. Like, this is like the kind of stuff that you start hearing about when you watch a lot of Fox News and Newsmax, and that's fine. Like, this is out there. But that is like this weird separate track. But there aren't barriers between these things. There aren't clear barriers between critical race theory as an idea and getting to like anti-racism and then the white fragility thing. They all sort of hybrid together.
And the I don't know if you've seen this. It's a poster that was for a long time on the African American Museum's website by Tima Okun about how and this is critical race theory adjacent stuff, and it's aspects of white supremacist culture.
The African American History Museum, the one they took down.
They took it down, but that thing has been everywhere, and the stuff in there is garbage. It stresses that, you know, being punctual, being hardworking, having a stable family, all sorts of things that most people associate as good are aspects of whiteness. And then the contraries to those are aspects of blackness or being a person of color, which is wrong. Then that's teaching like racial essentialism, that there are essential characteristics of race, and that white people have the good ones. And that's like, how is that different from what a KKK person would teach someone, right? That's a racist belief that all the good aspects of society have to do with whiteness. So that kind of thing, I understand parents don't want their kids exposed to that, or they don't want their kids being taught that that's how you're supposed to think, right? So then it starts to get a little tricky, because I don't think if you teach kids about communism necessarily they all become communists, right? Don't some realize communism is bad, right? We can't be so afraid of children picking up whatever they're told. Like, children rebel against what they're told, and you can teach someone about something without teaching them to worship or agree with that thing. So that's where some of these efforts start to go awry, the efforts to like purge this from schools.
Yeah, one of my uncles had reached out to me and was like, have you heard of EDI trainings? And I guess it's like something that goes on in the corporate workplace. And I was like, I had to look it up. I was like, oh, equity, diversity, inclusion. Yeah. It's sort of the same suite of different policies. It's packaged a different way, but at their core, they're the exact same thing. And so my school board in the town of Manassas, they have their own policy that they have put forward, which is an equity, diversity, inclusion policy, and also an anti-racism commitment. And it's just like full of vague, flowery language about equity as like the normal and base outline goal of the school district. So I actually went and spoke to my school district. I didn't throw anything at them or punch anybody or scream bloody murder, but here are a couple of my comments. I want to begin by saying I believe that this board is committed to improving the lives of Manassas' kids, and there is no doubt an energy in America for rethinking certain systems. ACC and DIB use a lot of corporate and kind of vague language, which I think obscure what is a pretty massive overhaul to the mission and orientation of the schools here. What this policy aims to fix is a lot bigger than Manassas City Schools. Systemic racism in certain areas of life is very real, but using it as a catch-all excuse to explain away classroom challenges is dishonest and burdens kids with a perception of struggle that has real consequences on their performance. But what this policy does is wrong. It looks at historical struggle and places Manassas City Schools in the position of being responsible for eliminating social ills beyond its purview. DAB empowers this board to funnel money toward consultants, politically charged staff trainings, and administrative glut. So long as inequity in outcomes exists, it is very much a blank check. What it does not say in this document is that Manassas City Schools is responsible for teaching kids to read. That's the main point. Like, they want all of these things, but in these documents, they say like the foundational commitment of schools now is to eliminate disparities between groups. Nothing about teaching kids to read, even though literacy and actually being able to read and write are the things which keep you out of prison. And prison keeps you, once you go to prison, like it's all downhill from there for the rest of your life. It reorients these schools in a destructive way. Also, school always reveals disparities. They don't need to be group-based disparities, but there will always be disparities between individuals because some kids are good at reading and others aren't. Some kids are good at math and others aren't. There's a new, again, this is not critical race theory, but adjacent to it, we can, I guess, use the same shorthand. In California schools, they want to eliminate, in Canadian schools, they want to eliminate advanced math programs, or they want to delay them as long as possible. They want all the kids taking the same math courses for as long as possible because that's equity. That's nobody any better than anyone else. And that's absurd. That's so I actually
stupid.
have an alternative opinion, because I had looked into that and I actually ended up writing about it some in my book, How the Force Can Fix the World. And one of the things that I came to believe after reading about that was my own experience in math. Once I was put on the troubled track in math and like all the other kids went on to more advanced math classes, and I was put on the I need help route with mathematics, I'm around other people who suck at math, and the suckage just increases in that room because nobody cares. You're not around anybody who cares about math. And I was like, I understand a little bit like the intention there, because once you group people based on that aptitude, you're not benefiting from your classmates who are further along.
But who cares? You can tell by 5th grade who's good at math and who's not. And the kids who aren't good at math, they should stop studying it. Honestly, I was one of those kids. I fell further and further and further in the math track as it went on. But it doesn't matter because I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. My lack of knowledge of math has not held me back at all. We need more different tracks and different people who are not academically inclined at all. They can learn a trade. The idea, the equity push is that we all have to learn the same thing and be held at the same rate and turn out the same, which ignores the vast differences of human beings.
And for libertarians, this is the tough.
This is the bad part of it.
Well, this is the tough position because we're now slipping into kind of defending the idea of public schools in the first place, which is that we all like learn the same things and we're all like going to be on the same track. When we want to be arguing that like actually this whole system is rotten to the core, and it's rotten before CRT, it's rotten after it. But this kind of gets me to the question of bans. There have been some efforts in like Pennsylvania and Florida, Ron Desantis, like to actually like crack down on the teaching of critical race theory in schools. Tell me a little bit about like what you've read on these bans, what they are, what they aren't, and then I want to know what you think of them and whether or not they are principled and can be defended.
Yeah, so I think there's bills have been proposed in several dozen states. They've passed in like 7 of them. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, other places.
North Carolina's working on one.
Yeah, Pennsylvania's working on one. So I was let's just take the Pennsylvania one. I was looking at that one closely. Again, they can't just say we're critical race theory is banned, because what does that even mean? So they'll say things like the teaching of racial and sexism. Teaching of sexism should be prohibited, not just for K through 12 schools, but also through colleges, and also for any teacher to teach that, and for any speaker to come to campus to advocate that. Well, wait a minute. Weren't we against cancel culture? Weren't we against the disinvitation of speakers? Remember then when that was the big thing? And I was one of those people arguing that we should not disinvite people from school. But
I think that's your thing.
That is my thing. But I think Ben Shapiro and other conservatives, for instance, believe that there are differences between men and women, and that these differences to some degree prescribe different roles in society. Well, I think that might run afoul of this bill that prohibits you from teaching sexism on college campuses, right? Or at least it would be so confusing and so risky. There would be calls for administrators to disinvite people for this reason.
Line in the sand. You said college campuses, because this is where I get like ideologically, just confused, because what I am concerned about is public schools. I'm concerned about K through 12 education.
That's what I'm concerned about, too.
Critical race theory is a fine legal theory to talk about. Like Ben Shapiro had mentioned, like he studied that when he went to law school. I think you should study that idea, and then you decide whether or not it makes sense. It's that like in the public school debate, you're talking about, this is not being suggested as like, well, kids, this is one way you could think about the world, but I could also be completely wrong, and maybe capitalism is the greatest thing that ever happened to mankind. That's not what happens. They are forcing it as fact. Like they are going, this is the way the world works. And my reaction to that is, well, they can't do that. They can't do that without public consent. And I guess you could say they have it because you elected the school board, even if 30 people are all that showed up to vote for it. That's how the system works. But you should be able to put the brakes on this kind of stuff if it doesn't represent public will.
Yeah, you can. I agree with that. I think the state legislature doing it will often be very clumsy and cumbersome and heavy-handed, and might end up inadvertently criminalizing things you don't want criminalized. I also think it's not so much the curriculum that's the issue here. I mean, even with what you were talking about with Manassas schools, and I looked a little bit at that proposal. The thing I was most troubled about was the idea that they might have like microaggression. They'd be recording them, and you might go on your permanent record if you had committed a racist act or statement. That's a kind of disciplinary regime. It's not really what's being taught. It's that kind of stuff I'm concerned about, because that does come from the campus. It's been troublesome there. It's it's getting rid of privileged, prestigious programs, because not everyone is good at math. It's practicing explicit racial discrimination in terms of admissions.
In hiring
and admissions. I mean, they want to do this in high schools. There are some elite high schools where they're going to basically punish Asian applicants for being Asian people. And that should be prohibited. We should absolutely prohibit that. I'm totally for prohibiting that. I prefer prohibiting that at the college level, everywhere it is. So I would, rather than ban critical race theory, I would ban racial discrimination in education. How about that? That's what I would do.
So Andrew Sullivan's definitive take on this was, let's use liberal means, airing this topic, exposing its arguments, decoding its language, and explaining its ultimately totalitarian logic to beat this illiberal menace in the field of public opinion. And so basically, like Parents Defending Education, one of the organizations kind of out front on this, like they have said, like there are lawsuits that can be had here. Like let's take it to the judiciary to see if this runs afoul of like equal employment opportunities. Because like in Manassas, like what they're going to do, and modeling it after Fairfax and Albemarle counties in Virginia, is that they want to make teacher hires that reflect the student population. So you are explicitly saying, we are going to be looking for more Hispanic teachers.
Right.
And we're going to have if we have a student body that is 70% Hispanic, which is the fastest growing Hispanic region in the country, you are saying that is kind of be how many we take. We're going to do quotas.
Right.
That kind of already happens in a lot of cases.
It's illegal in some states.
It's illegal.
You could
in
make it
some
illegal
states.
in these states. It should be illegal. So there. That's a better crusade, honestly.
Right.
That's a better crusade. Do that. Let's work at abolishing that. There's a precedent for abolishing it because it is in some circumstances, at some levels, abolished in other states. So I think that would be a better use of our time, frankly.
Okay, but even on the left of center, Zaid Jilani, he now writes for Inquirer. I think that's his new Substack. I like it a lot. He is someone who I follow on this, and I really respect where he came down on this. And Matt Iglesias as well, who's fled Vox to go be on Substack, where their perspective was yeah, history is not handled correctly. We don't teach it very well. I remember learning about the GI Bill, right? There's some sort of viral graphic going around social media right now, which says, normal history is learning about the GI Bill and how the soldiers came home and they were all given homes. Critical race theory means you learn about discrimination based on color and redlining of districts for homeownership. And I go actually, no, that's just all history, and we need to do a better job of teaching history. But critical race theory demands a lot more of the administration. Why not ban it in public schools, and why not allow people to actually say, no, you can't teach this unless this is by public consent?
If it is the idea that whiteness is a culture that has all the positive attributes, and if you're not white, you don't have those attributes because of who you are, yes, that is wrong and should not be taught. To the extent that's being taught, I don't want that taught. I think still you will have a hard time crafting a specific bill that sort of covers that case.
Yeah.
The best solution here, honestly, it's the libertarian solution. Surprise, surprise. Fund people, not schools. Parents should decide. I want to give parents and families more control over their kids' education. I think they absolutely deserve more control over their own children's education. So whatever money is going to the public school system, I would just give it to those kids, and they can work out whatever educational arrangement you want. And if you want to send your kid to a progressive
You're
critical
just like
race
David
theory
French.
school,
You
do
won't
that.
stand up and fight, Robby. You won't stand up
I
and
won't,
fight.
Every time something goes wrong in my life, I blame David French. I once saw a Trans Lives Matter sticker on the ground as I was walking, and I said, David, he didn't even prevent this. How could you?
Robby Soave, thanks for coming on and dishing on CRT and efforts to ban it. We'll see what happens.
My pleasure. Great chatting with you.
Thanks, Robby.